This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome. Join us on a captivating journey into the heart of Central Europe, where we unravel the complex relationship between Germany and Austria. Despite their shared language and intertwined history, how do these two nations truly view each other? Prepare to explore centuries of shared heritage, shifting identities, linguistic nuances, and the often humorous, sometimes sharp, perceptions that define this unique sibling dynamic. It's a story of more than just neighbors. Chapter 1. From Empire to Identity, a Shared History. The story of Germans and Austrians is a saga etched in the very bedrock of Central European history, a complex and often tumultuous dance of shared heritage, shifting loyalties, and profound events that continue to shape their modern identities. To grasp the nuanced perceptions they hold of each other today, we must journey back through the centuries, tracing the deep ties that once bound them and the seismic forces that ultimately forged their distinct paths. For much of European history, the lines between what we now call Germany and Austria were far blurrier than they are today. Imagine the vast, sprawling Holy Roman Empire, an entity that encompassed the bulk of present-day Germany, Austria, Bohemia, Czech Republic, Slovenia, northern Italy, and western Poland. Officially designated a German polity from 1512, it was a loose confederation of states where, for centuries, the House of Habsburg, based in Vienna, held immense power and often provided the emperors. Austria, under the Habsburgs, wasn't just another state. It was often the dominant force, shaping the political and cultural landscape across a wide swath of Central Europe. This shared past meant that for many, particularly before the 19th century, identifying as German was more a cultural or linguistic descriptor than a strictly national one, encompassing the people of Austria as well as other German-speaking territories. Within this empire, a constant jostling for power among the German states was a defining characteristic, setting the stage for future rivalries. However, this grand, shared narrative began to unravel with the rise of modern nationalism and the emergence of another formidable power within the Holy Roman Empire, Prussia. This ambitious northern state, under leaders like Frederick the Great, began to challenge Austria's traditional dominance, leading to a series of intense conflicts. Prussia and Austria famously fought a series of wars over the province of Silesia in modern-day southwestern Poland between 1740 and 1763, highlighting the intensity of their competition and foreshadowing the eventual struggle for German hegemony. This rivalry intensified after the Napoleonic Wars, which saw the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire itself. In its place, the German Confederation was formed in 1815, with Austria initially taking the lead. However, this new confederation lacked a monarch or a central government with real unifying force, contributing significantly to the dualism and diplomatic tension between Prussia and Austria. The fundamental German question remained. How would the German-speaking lands unite? Would it be under Austrian leadership, a greater German solution, Großdeutsche Lösung, that included the Habsburgs' multi-ethnic empire, or under Prussian dominance, a smaller German solution, Kleindeutsche Lösung, that excluded Austria? Otto von Bismarck, the shrewd Prussian chancellor, decisively answered this question through military might. Following Prussia's swift victory in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, Austria was effectively sidelined from German affairs, losing significant influence over southern German states like Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria. The German Empire was then forged in 1871, a powerful new nation-state that pointedly excluded Austria. This pivotal moment forced Austria to turn its imperial ambitions elsewhere, leading to the formation of the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy in 1867, a multi-ethnic entity distinct from the new German Empire. For the first time, Germany and Austria were clearly separate political entities, though their cultural and linguistic ties remained strong. The end of World War I brought monumental change to both nations. The German Empire fell, and the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, leaving a much reduced German-speaking rump state known as Austria. In the immediate aftermath, the majority in both countries wanted unification with Germany, now the Weimar Republic, into a greater German nation. Austrians even briefly renamed their country the Republic of German-Austria, explicitly signaling their intent. This yearning for unification stemmed from a sense of shared identity and a fear that the small, landlocked Austrian state would not be economically viable on its own. However, the victorious Allied powers who created the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, 1919, against both Germany and Austria, explicitly forbade such a union. This was strictly forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles to avoid a dominant German state, legally cementing their separation, though the underlying desire for unification lingered in some quarters. Then came the darkest chapter in their shared history, the rise of Nazism and the Second World War. Adolf Hitler, an Austrian by birth, harbored a fervent belief in a greater German motherland that included his homeland. His ideology, clearly articulated in Mein Kampf, stated, "German-Austria must return to the great German motherland, and common blood belongs in a common Reich." After consolidating power in Germany, he relentlessly pursued the annexation of Austria. Despite initial resistance, including a failed 1934 coup by Austrian Nazis and Mussolini temporarily blocking Hitler until 1936, Hitler's ambitions culminated in the Anschluss in March 1938. Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg, pressured by Hitler, was forced to cancel a plebiscite on Austrian independence, and under duress, Arthur Seyss-Inquart invited the German army to restore order. With Britain and France pursuing a policy of appeasement, German troops marched into Austria. This annexation was, by many accounts, widely popular in both Germany and Austria at the time. Huge crowds welcomed German troops in Vienna, and a subsequent plebiscite claimed overwhelming support for the Union. Austria was absorbed into Nazi Germany, becoming a part of the Third Reich. This period saw the horrific persecution of Austrian Jews and the full integration of Austrian society into the machinery of Nazi Germany, with many Austrians actively participating in its crimes. The end of World War II dramatically reversed the Anschluss. Austria was liberated, declared independent, and, crucially, occupied separately from Germany by the Allied powers until 1955. This separation was not merely a political act. It was a deliberate effort to weaken Germany and prevent a resurgence of its aggressive power. For Austria, the post-war period marked a profound shift in national identity. Confronted with the atrocities of Nazism, Austrian society embraced what became known as the first victim theory. This narrative, first articulated in the 1946 Red, White, Red book, posited that Austria was Hitler's initial victim, forcibly annexed, and therefore largely absolved of responsibility for the Nazi regime's crimes. This theory, popular from its start in 1949 to 1988, allowed Austrians to distance themselves from the immense guilt associated with the Holocaust and the war, effectively rebranding themselves as a separate, distinct nation. However, this narrative began to be disproved by Austrians themselves since 1988, leading to a more critical self-assessment of their role in the Third Reich. This deliberate construction of a new national identity, coupled with the 1955 Austrian State Treaty, which explicitly banned any future reunification with Germany, profoundly reshaped Austrian self-perception. Beyond the first victim theory, other factors contributed to this distinct identity, including preserving Austrians' Catholic religious identity from the potential danger posed by being part of a Protestant-majority Germany, as well as their different historical heritage regarding their mainly Celtic, Slavic, Avar, Rhathian, and Roman origin prior to the colonization of the Germanic Rivalry. Over decades, the first victim theory slowly gave way to a more nuanced, albeit still difficult, reckoning with their willing participation in the Nazi era. Yet the outcome was clear. The shift in self-identification was dramatic. In a 1956 survey, 46% of Austrians still considered themselves to be Germans. Another survey carried out in 1964 revealed that only 15% of Austrians still considered themselves to be Germans. By 1987, a mere 6% of Austrians identified as Germans, a stark contrast to earlier sentiments. Today, over 90% see themselves as an independent nation, proud of their distinct culture, historical achievements, and constitutional neutrality. The very notion of reunification, once a powerful aspiration, is now largely taboo in both countries, viewed through the lens of the Nazi past. However, the shadow of this tumultuous history persists. Germans, having undergone a rigorous process of confronting their past, sometimes view Austria's earlier embrace of the first victim narrative with a degree of skepticism, a lingering schadenfreude mixed with suspicion. This historical baggage contributes to a subtle dynamic in their modern relations. While unification is no longer a serious political or popular aspiration for either country, the echoes of past attempts, particularly the dark period of the Anschluss, continue to inform a complex and often understated layer of their contemporary interactions. This complex interplay of historical forces, identity shifts, and geopolitical realities has forged two distinct nations from a once shared heritage. Understanding this profound transformation is crucial to appreciating the nuanced, often contradictory, perceptions that define the German-Austrian relationship today, a relationship that continues to evolve under the long shadow of their intertwined past. Chapter 2. Perceptions. Indifference to animosity. Beneath the surface of shared language and intertwined histories, the perceptions Germans and Austrians hold of one another are far from monolithic. Instead, they form a rich, often contradictory tapestry woven with threads of indifference, affectionate amusement, friendly rivalry, and sometimes a genuine undercurrent of resentment or animosity. It's a complex emotional landscape, rarely simple, and frequently shaped by geography, personal experiences, and the ever-present weight of national identity. From the German perspective, particularly those living further north, the view of Austria can often be characterized by a surprising degree of indifference. For many, Austria simply exists as a pleasant, mountainous neighbor, a picturesque destination for ski holidays or summer hikes. The sheer size and economic dominance of Germany mean that Austria, with roughly 1/10 of its population, often doesn't occupy a prominent place in the average German's daily thoughts. When they do think of Austria, it's often with a benign affection. Many Germans genuinely like Austria, seeing it as a friendly country, a close relative rather than a distant stranger, even finding it sorta cute. This casual fondness can manifest in various ways, sometimes amusing, sometimes unintentionally condescending. Germans might view Austria as the little brother, the little Germany, or, more specifically, the other Bavaria, or Bergdeutsche, mountain Germans, a perception rooted in the cultural and linguistic similarities between Austria and Germany's southern state. This isn't always meant negatively. It's often an attempt to categorize the familiar. Yet, some Germans also perceive Austrians as snobbish, believing themselves to be somehow better. A German user noted that Germans appear to be more accepting of all kinds of people, a self-perception that subtly contrasts with their view of Austrian traditionalism. Yet this amusement rarely veers into malice. For a German, Austria is often a place of good memories, picturesque landscapes, and a shared cultural heritage that feels comfortably close. However, a deeper, more academic look at these perceptions reveals a fascinating and somewhat surprising asymmetry. Research into mutual social perceptions indicates that Germans tend to view Austrians as incompetent but nice. This stereotype suggests that while they find Austrians personable, charming, and hospitable, they might implicitly ascribe to them a lower degree of dependability, industriousness, or education. This contrasts sharply with the Austrian view of Germans, which we'll explore shortly. This incompetent but nice label, though perhaps softened by personal interactions, hints at a subtle underlying sense of superiority on the part of the larger nation. It's a perception that often comes without significant emotional investment. Germans generally don't harbor deep-seated animosity, their view of Austria remaining largely casual and unburdened by intense rivalry. The Austrian perspective, however, is significantly more complex and emotionally charged. For Austrians, defining themselves against their larger neighbor is a fundamental aspect of their national identity. They are fiercely adamant about not being mistaken for Germans, a sentiment that has solidified dramatically since the post-World War II era. This strong desire for differentiation fuels much of the perceived rivalry. This asymmetrical dynamic highlights that Austrians do think about Germans, and often with a critical eye. This isn't to say that all Austrians harbor animosity. A significant portion acknowledges a friendly rivalry, particularly in areas like sports. Yet beneath this friendly banter, a deeper vein of resentment and even animosity can run. Austrians often perceive Germans as arrogant, show-offish, uptight, too direct, and lacking a nuanced sense of humor. This perception is deeply rooted in cultural differences in communication and social interaction. Michael, a journalist from Linz, vividly summarizes a common cliché: the corrupt but sweet-talking Austrian versus the very correct German, highlighting a self-perception that values charm over rigid adherence. Germans are often described as precise, punctual, and direct, going straight to the heart of the matter, even if it's unflattering. Austrians, by contrast, prefer to convey things more elaborately, to pack a small insulting jab into as many words as possible to make it sound mild without losing its sharpness. This is often attributed to Schmäh, explicitly defined as being social, friendly, cultured, and very witty, a crucial aspect of Austrian communication and humor. This clash of communication styles can lead to significant misunderstandings, with German directness often interpreted as rudeness or a know-it-all attitude by Austrians, who prioritize politeness and interpersonal considerations. Austrians also perceive Germans as condescending and ignorant about language, acting like only they know proper German, and whatever we do differently is just dialect and wrong. This can create an intercultural barrier in business, where Austrian non-committal and diplomatic approaches lead Germans to see them as shady, while Austrians find German directness rude. The feeling of being overshadowed by Germany's size and power can breed an inferiority complex that manifests as outward criticism. This is particularly evident in their differing attitudes towards rules. The saying, "Die Österreicher haben Regeln wie die Deutschen und brechen sie wie die Italiener," perfectly encapsulates the Austrian live and let live mentality, contrasting sharply with German adherence. This more relaxed, improvisational approach is further illustrated by "Wird schon gehen," it's gonna work out somehow, an unofficial Austrian motto that highlights their less meticulous nature compared to German planning. The academic research mentioned earlier that Germans perceive Austrians as incompetent but nice is mirrored by the Austrian view of Germans as competent but cold. Austrians explicitly and implicitly describe Germans as competent, industrious, and well-informed, but also cold, bossy, boastful, and intrusive. This perception aligns with social identity theory, which suggests that the population of a smaller, less powerful country will often denigrate the more powerful one to preserve its own self-esteem and group identity. Accusing Germans of being cold and arrogant can thus be seen as a psychological defense mechanism, a way for Austrians to maintain their face in the face of a perceived threat to their identity. Crucially, the cultural differences extend to humor. Germans are often seen as having a dry, direct sense of humor, which Austrians, with their preference for more elaborate, sarcastic, or even subtly insulting wit, often find difficult to understand or appreciate. One Austrian recounted how relationships with German women didn't work out due to a lack of shared humor, suggesting that when it comes to jokes, it's better to speak English with Germans. This difference underscores a fundamental divergence in social rhythm and interaction that goes beyond mere language. Austrians are often considered more outgoing and cheerful, living on a different frequency than the precise and punctual Germans. This live and let live mentality contrasts sharply with the German tendency to adhere strictly to rules and even intervene in others' affairs if perceived rules are broken. However, the spectrum of views is further complicated by regional variations. Germany is not a culturally homogeneous entity, and the relationship between Austrians and Germans is influenced by proximity. Despite this intricate web of perceptions, a practical coexistence and mutual reliance underpin the relationship. Both nations are integral members of the European Union, enjoying free movement, a shared currency, and robust economic ties. While the banter and stereotypes persist, often fueled by competitive sports or political disagreements, they rarely escalate into serious diplomatic crises. The relationship, though marked by occasional friction and deep-seated differences in self-perception, remains fundamentally one of close neighbors, bound by history, language, and an undeniable familiarity. The question isn't whether they are the same, but rather, how do these deeply ingrained, often contradictory perceptions shape their shared future? Chapter 3. The Language Divide. Imagine two close relatives sharing a family name and a common ancestry, yet speaking with subtle but unmistakable differences in tone, vocabulary, and even the very rhythm of their words. This is akin to the relationship between German and Austrian German, a linguistic dance that plays a profound role in shaping the distinct national identities of these two neighboring countries. While both nations officially speak German, the nuances of their language often connect them in ways that are deeply familiar, yet simultaneously serve as powerful markers of separation and unique cultural heritage. At a fundamental level, Austrians and Germans generally understand each other. Think of it much like an American understanding a British person. The core structure and vocabulary are largely the same. However, this mutual intelligibility exists on a spectrum, from effortless communication to moments of genuine bewilderment, heavily influenced by regional dialects and accents. Standard German, or Hochdeutsch, is the common tongue taught in schools and used in formal settings across both countries, providing a crucial bridge. Yet, beyond this shared standard, Austrian German proudly asserts its own distinct variant, characterized by a softer pronunciation, a more melodic lilt, and a rich tapestry of unique vocabulary that often leaves Northern Germans scratching their heads. The differences in everyday vocabulary are perhaps the most immediately noticeable and often amusing. Step into a restaurant in Austria after learning German in Germany, and you might find yourself delightfully confused by the menu. A Pfannkuchen, pancake, in Germany becomes a Palatschinken in Austria. Your beloved whipped cream, Schlagsahne, transforms into Obers or Schlagobers. That delicious mushroom, the Pfifferling, is more commonly known as an Irischwammel. It doesn't stop at the dinner table. A potato is an Erdapfel rather than a Kartoffel. A tomato a Paradeiser instead of a Tomate, and green beans are Fisolen, where Germans might say Bohnen. For a snack, a German Kleinigkeit is an Austrian Jause. A German Krankenhaus is an Austrian Spital, and a Kühlschrank an Eiskasten. Even a simple cup, Tasse, becomes a Hefe, and ground beef, Hackfleisch, ist Faschiertes. Cauliflower, Blumenkohl, ist Karfiol. Basic temporal markers shift. January is Jana, February, Febe, and this year is simply Heuer. For a pub or bar, a German Kneipe or Lokal might be a Chacker or Beisel in Austria. A boy, Bubchen, becomes a Bubel. Stairs are Stiege instead of Treppe. A chimney sweeper is a Rauchfangkehrer, not a Schornsteinfeger. High school graduation exams are Matura instead of Abitur. Even a chair, Stuhl, in Germany is a Sessel in Austria, where Sessel in Germany means armchair. The legal profession is Jus in Austria, Jura in Germany. A street or lane is a Gasse in Austria, while Strasse is more common in Germany. These linguistic quirks are not mere regionalisms. They are deeply ingrained in the fabric of Austrian daily life, so much so that when Austria joined the European Union in 1995, it successfully insisted that its specific terminology, particularly culinary terms, be granted protected status. This act alone speaks volumes about the significance of language to Austrian identity. Beyond individual words, the very sounds of the languages diverge. Austrian German is often described as softer, more lilting and sing-songy compared to the sharper, more direct pronunciation often heard in northern Germany. This isn't just an aesthetic difference, it shapes perceptions, with the German accent sometimes perceived as sounding like the speaker always knows better, a perception that contributes to the know-it-all stereotype discussed in Chapter 2. Conversely, Germans often find the Austrian accent charming, even funny, a pleasant contrast to their own more straightforward speech patterns. Though some German academics abroad have dismissed Austrian German as rural, charming but wrong, or a non-standard variety of German. This melodic quality is particularly notable in specific regional dialects. While Viennese, despite fading in its purest form, still influences the overall perception of Austrian speech, other dialects offer distinct characteristics. In Western Austria, Alemannic dialects, spoken in Reutte district and Vorarlberg, bordering Liechtenstein and Switzerland, feature examples like Gott for gut, good, and Bissel for bisschen. Tyrolean accents add extra consonants, such as gestern for gestern, yesterday, du bist for du bist, you are, and musst for musst. The Styrian dialect, spoken by about 1 million Austrians, transforms ja into yo and apfel into upfel, and famously uses goal at the end of questions. Even Bavarian dialects, which share a family with Austrian German, have unique features, like the use of double negatives, as in das hab ich noch nie nicht gemacht, I have never done that. Grammatical differences, while subtle, further underscore this linguistic divergence. Consider the use of diminutives, those suffixes that make things sound small or endearing. While Standard German often uses chen or line, as in Madchen for girl or Brotchen for bread roll, Austrian German predominantly uses l or erl. So a little girl becomes a Madel, a small house a Hausel, and a small beer a Seidel. Personal pronouns also vary in informal speech, with I for ich, mir for wir, and die for sie, they. Present tense verb conjugations can differ too, such as I bin for ich bin, I am, sie es sein for sie es ist, and mir sein for wir sind, we are. Even the formation of the perfect tense for certain verbs can differ. Where a German might say, ich habe gesessen, I have sat, an Austrian might use ich bin gesessen, employing sein, to be, as the auxiliary verb instead of haben. Austrians also typically use the dative case instead of the genitive for possession. These aren't errors, they are established, recognized variations that contribute to the unique flavor of Austrian German. Everyday expressions and greetings also highlight this cultural divide. While Guten Tag is the ubiquitous German greeting, Austrians often opt for the more traditional Grüß Gott, literally greet God, or the casual Servus, a greeting also common in Bavaria. When saying goodbye, a German might offer a quick Tschüss, while an Austrian might prefer Fiat. Even an informal kiss is a busi, and the versatile exclamation oida can express everything from surprise to exasperation, much like dude in English. These linguistic choices are not merely stylistic. They are deeply embedded in social etiquette and reflect differing cultural values in communication style, a topic explored further in Chapter 2. The role of language in national identity is particularly pronounced for Austrians. Since the post-World War II era, when Austria actively sought to forge an identity separate from Germany, as detailed in Chapter 1, language has been a crucial tool in this endeavor. This active differentiation is reflected in government initiatives such as the 1951 publication of the Österreichisches Wörterbuch, Austrian Dictionary, which officially set standards for Austria's particular form of German. More recently, a new government booklet urged teachers to favor the Austrian word Schlagobus for cream over the German Sahne, Marille for apricot instead of aprikosa, and the traditional Austrian greeting Servus for goodbye instead of the German Tschüss. A comprehensive language survey revealed that Austrians overwhelmingly perceive Austrian Standard German as more beautiful and correct, more educated, precise and accurate, and more melodic, softer, melting on the tongue like a piece of delicate chocolate, than German Standard German, which they often view as more arrogant. This isn't just national pride. It's a deliberate assertion of a distinct cultural space, a pluricentric view of the German language, where their variant stands as a legitimate standard, not merely a regional deviation. This linguistic landscape is further complicated by the unique position of Bavarian German. Geographically bordering Austria, Bavaria shares a profound cultural and linguistic affinity with its southern neighbor. Many Bavarians and Austrians speak dialects that are part of the larger Austro-Bavarian dialect family, making communication between them often more seamless than between a Bavarian and a Northern German. This linguistic closeness fosters a cultural affinity, the deeper implications of which are explored in Chapter 4. For those from the north, distinguishing a Bavarian from an Austrian can be challenging, as both might sound like the weird, not really foreigners from the south. The distinctiveness of Austrian German also owes a great deal to its rich historical influences. The long reign of the Habsburg Empire, with its multi-ethnic character, integrated elements from Latin, Italian, French, Yiddish, and Slavic languages, particularly in eastern regions, especially in the vibrant Viennese dialect. This historical layering has imbued Austrian German with a unique flavor, a spice or paprika, as one observer put it, that sets it apart from its German counterpart. Terms like marroni for roasted chestnuts, from Italian, or ordering a mélange instead of a Milchkaffee, from French, in a Viennese coffee house are direct echoes of this imperial past. A Pauvitteltasche, a Bohemian pastry popular in Vienna, is another example of this rich cultural fusion. This heritage is often lost on Germans who, growing up in a largely monocentric linguistic environment, may not fully appreciate the historical depth and external influences that shaped Austrian German. Ultimately, the differences in language and dialect between Germany and Austria are far more than just quaint regional variations. They are living testaments to divergent histories, cultural values, and national aspirations. While German serves as a shared foundation, the specific ways in which it is spoken, understood, and cherished in Austria have become indispensable elements in forging and maintaining a distinct Austrian identity. This linguistic tapestry continues to weave itself into the daily interactions, perceptions, and even the subtle rivalries between these two nations, reminding us that a common language can, paradoxically, be the very thing that most clearly defines their differences. How these linguistic nuances contribute to the prevalence of stereotypes and common jokes will be our next exploration. Chapter 4. The Piefke and the Schmäh. The intricate dance between Germans and Austrians is perhaps nowhere more vividly illustrated than in the realm of their shared jokes and deeply ingrained stereotypes. These often humorous, sometimes biting, serve as a cultural shorthand, encapsulating centuries of rivalry, affection, and misunderstanding. They are not merely casual observations, but potent cultural artifacts, revealing the underlying currents of their complex relationship. One of the most instantly recognizable markers of this dynamic is the term Piefke. For many Austrians, this is the quintessential, often derogatory, label for Germans, particularly those from the north. The Piefke is perceived as arrogant, loud, humorless, and overly direct, a stark contrast to the Austrian self-image of being charming, laid back, and subtly witty. This stereotype is so pervasive that it even became the title of a popular Austrian miniseries, Die Piefke Saga, which humorously depicted the culture clash between a wealthy German family vacationing in Tyrol and the local Austrians. The term isn't always used with malice. Sometimes it's a playful jab, especially in the context of friendly rivalry. However, it can also carry a genuine sting, revealing a deeper, sometimes serious dislike. German students in Austria have recounted experiences far beyond mere name-calling, being excluded from communication by Austrian fellows, refused renting a room because of their nationality, or shouted at when their German accent became apparent. More disturbingly, a German flag has been burnt in public by hooligans, and some have been threatened by neighbors with slashed tires or bullied by Austrian drivers once their German license plates were spotted. This suggests that the Piefke isn't just a caricature, but can be a symbol of profound underlying tensions. The linguistic cousin to Piefke in southern Germany, particularly Bavaria, is Saubreißen, a term roughly translating to Prussian pig used to describe northern Germans. This shared derogatory label highlights a surprising alignment between Bavarians and Austrians against their northern German counterparts. It underscores the cultural and linguistic proximity between Bavaria and Austria, often leading to the jest that Austrians are merely Eastern Bavarians or Bavarians are Northern Austrians. This common bond in their perception of the other German allows for a certain camaraderie, even as both groups are equally quick to poke fun at each other. Of course, the Germans have their own reciprocal term for Austrians, Schluchtenscheisser, which translates rather uncharitably to canyon-shithers. While perhaps less widely known internationally than Piefke, it reflects a similar impulse to categorize and diminish the perceived other. This term, reportedly used by a significant number of South Germans, demonstrates that the exchange of playful or not-so-playful insults is a two-way street, born from the deep familiarity of close neighbors. Beyond these direct labels, the divergence in humor stands out as a significant cultural difference that often fuels stereotypes. Austrians are often seen by Germans as having a more elaborate, sarcastic, and sometimes biting sense of humor, delivered with a serious face that can make it difficult for an outsider to discern whether a statement is meant to be funny or genuinely insulting. This Schmäh, as it's called in Austria, represents a distinct style of wit. As one German actor and comedian living in Austria observed, he had no opinions about Austrians when he arrived, but quickly realized every Austrian had an opinion about Germans. Adding another layer to this linguistic and cultural divide, Austrians often note that in Germany, speaking a dialect might lead people to think you're uneducated, whereas in Austria, it's the most normal thing to do, and speaking standard German might make people think you're pretentious. Perhaps the most famous and enduring joke encapsulating the complex historical and identity-shifting dynamics between the two nations involves two iconic figures, Ludwig von Beethoven and Adolf Hitler. The joke goes that Austria's greatest achievement was convincing the world that Hitler was German and Mozart was Austrian. Sometimes Beethoven, who was German, is mistakenly included in the Austrian side of the joke, further highlighting the comedic reappropriation of cultural heritage. This jest is far more than mere banter. It speaks to an uncomfortable truth and the lingering historical narrative it represents. Its enduring popularity, even among Germans who might express a degree of saltiness about it, is a testament to how effectively Austria reshaped its national image after the war, a feat of cultural diplomacy that Germans often acknowledge with a mix of grudging admiration and lingering resentment. These stereotypes extend to broader character traits. From the German perspective, Austrians are sometimes viewed as snobbish, believing themselves to be somehow better, friendlier, more sophisticated, or possessing a superior sense of humor. Germans might also joke about Austria's perceived conservatism, its historical attachment to Catholicism, and its notorious title fixation, where Herr Doktor and Herr Professor are used with an almost ceremonial reverence, even sometimes appearing on bank cards. This formality is often a source of amusement for Germans, who find it excessive. A simple culinary joke also highlights a distinct difference. "We don't put gravy on our schnitzel," Austrians might quip, referencing a common German practice that is anathema to traditional Austrian cuisine. Another unique cultural observation is the stereotype that Austrians are born to contemplate about death, a nod to a certain melancholic introspection often attributed to the nation. Conversely, Austrians frequently stereotype Germans as rigid, overly rule-bound, and humorless. Everyday situations also give rise to common, often affectionate stereotypes. The socks with sandals fashion faux pas, while not exclusively German, has become a cult cliché internationally, often jokingly attributed to German tourists. Similarly, the stereotype of Germans reserving sun loungers on vacation with towels at dawn is a widely recognized humorous jab. These light-hearted stereotypes, while exaggerations, contribute to the tapestry of perceptions, reinforcing a sense of national character, often with a self-deprecating wink from Germans themselves. The rivalry is also intensely played out in sports, particularly football. While Germans might not view Austria as their primary sporting rival, for Austrians a victory against Germany, no matter how minor, is a cause for immense national pride. The 1978 World Cup match, where Austria's 3-2 victory knocked defending champions West Germany out of the tournament, remains a seminal event in Austrian football history, a moment of triumph over the Big Brother. This competitive spirit, while often framed as friendly, reveals a deep-seated desire for recognition and validation in the shadow of their larger neighbor. However, the rivalry isn't always so friendly. The 1982 World Cup Gijon affair saw West Germany and Austria allegedly collude in a match to ensure both teams progressed at the expense of Algeria, a controversial incident that still fuels resentment and highlights a less honorable side of their sporting interactions. These pervasive stereotypes and jokes, whether sharp or gentle, reflect a relationship forged in centuries of shared history, punctuated by moments of profound unity and painful separation. They are shorthand for cultural differences and expressions of national pride. They offer a window into how each nation constructs its identity, often in opposition to, or in affectionate exasperation with the other. This complex interplay of perception and projection ensures that the relationship between Germans and Austrians remains a rich and endlessly fascinating study in human culture, continually evolving yet always rooted in their distinctive intertwined past.
Chapter 5. The Asymmetrical Sibling Rivalry. The relationship between Germany and Austria, often characterized as a unique sibling-like rivalry, presents a fascinating study in cultural dynamics. It's a bond so intricate, so steeped in shared history, yet marked by distinct identities, that it frequently draws parallels to the dynamic between the United States and Canada. This comparison isn't merely anecdotal. It captures the essence of a larger, more powerful nation coexisting with a smaller, fiercely independent neighbor, both speaking a common language, yet striving to assert their unique cultural narratives. At its heart, this sibling rivalry is profoundly asymmetrical. For many Germans, particularly those residing further north, Austria is often viewed with a benign, almost indifferent affection. They might consider Austria a pleasant neighbor, a picturesque holiday destination, or simply sorta cute. The sheer scale of Germany, with a population roughly 10 times that of Austria, means that for most Germans, Austria doesn't occupy a central place in their daily thoughts. It's a friendly relative, a close cultural cousin, but not a constant preoccupation. As one German perspective humorously put it, Austrians, we hate you. Germans, we don't think about you at all. While an exaggeration, this quip perfectly encapsulates the disparity in their mutual attention. Germans tend to like Austria, appreciating it as its own thing, a neighboring country with whom they generally get along well.
However, from the Austrian vantage point, the relationship is far more emotionally charged and central to their national identity. Living in the shadow of Europe's economic powerhouse, Austrians are acutely aware of their larger neighbor and often define themselves in deliberate contrast to it. The comparison to the U.S. and Canada is particularly apt here. Just as Canadians often strive to differentiate themselves from their colossal southern neighbor despite sharing a language, for English-speaking Canada, a border, and many cultural touchstones, Austrians actively emphasize their unique qualities apart from Germany. Both Austria and Canada are smaller nations, adjacent to a much larger, more globally dominant power. Both share a common heritage, language, and often similar values, yet historical accidents and conscious choices led them to become separate countries. The smaller nation, in both cases, becomes highly conscious of not being the bigger one, while the larger nation tends to be less preoccupied with the distinction. This often results in the larger country having a more positive, or at least less critical, view of the smaller one, while the smaller country harbors more nuanced, sometimes critical, perceptions of its larger counterpart. This dynamic manifests in myriad ways, from the seemingly trivial to the politically significant. Take, for instance, the realm of communication and social etiquette. Germans are frequently direct, often to the point of bluntness. This directness, which Germans might see as efficiency, contrasts with Austrian communication. This is further highlighted by their differing approaches to addressing people. Germans tend to stick to the formal Sie, even in many professional contexts, while Austrians are more prone to use the informal Du more readily, even in business settings, which contrasts with the German emotional distance. Austrians, by contrast, cultivate a more elaborate, diplomatic, and often indirect communication style. This approach allows them to convey criticism or even subtle insults with a veneer of politeness, a skill that Germans sometimes struggle to decipher. The adherence to rules also highlights this sibling divergence. Germans are widely stereotyped and often self-identify as sticklers for rules, valuing order and strict adherence. For them, rules are generally there to be abided by. Austrians, while having plenty of rules themselves, often approach them with a more flexible, live and let live mentality, contrasting sharply with German meticulous planning. The big brother dynamic is particularly sensitive in political discourse. Germany, as the largest economy in the European Union, often assumes a leadership role in addressing continental challenges, from migration to economic policy. This can be perceived by Austrians as an attempt to play der große Bruder and dictate terms. When German politicians publicly criticize Austrian policies, such as Austria's refusal to take in refugees from Lesbos, the Austrian response is often a defiant assertion of independence. Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz's reply, "We are not going to follow the German example," was less about the specific policy and more about rejecting perceived German dominance, a political move that smartly shifted the narrative from refugees to national sovereignty. This constant pushback against German influence, even when both countries are EU members with shared goals, underscores the deep-seated need for autonomy in the smaller sibling. Economically, the relationship is one of undeniable interdependence, yet this too fuels the rivalry. Germany is Austria's most important trading partner, consistently running a trade surplus with Austria. Conversely, Austria's slightly lower corporate tax rates have attracted some German businesses, creating a complex web of mutual benefit and competition. This reliance, while beneficial, can also breed resentment among Austrians, who feel overshadowed by German economic might. Even in sports, the sibling rivalry plays out with fervor. While Germans might not always view Austria as their primary sporting adversary, for Austrians, any victory over Germany, especially in football, is a momentous occasion. More recently, an Austrian tennis player's victory over a German opponent in a major final stirred similar emotions, demonstrating that these sporting contests are imbued with symbolic weight beyond the game itself. The cultural identity of Austria, deeply influenced by its Habsburg past and Catholic traditions, further differentiates it from a Germany shaped by Prussian virtues and a significant Protestant ethic, as famously analyzed by Max Weber in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. While Germany is often associated with precision, efficiency, and a structured approach to life, with daily rhythms marked by strict schedules and early closing times for cafes, Austria prides itself on Gemütlichkeit, a sense of friendliness, warmth, and happiness, often expressed through its famed coffeehouse culture and a more relaxed pace of life. This coffeehouse culture, with its origins tracing back to the Ottoman era and Turkish traders, allows for hours of unhurried contemplation, a stark contrast to German daily behavior. This cultural contrast, while not always confrontational, reinforces the distinct paths these two nations have taken, despite their shared linguistic roots.
This unique sibling-like rivalry, then, is a defining characteristic of their bilateral relationship. It's a complex tapestry woven from shared heritage, geographical proximity, historical divergence, and asymmetrical power dynamics. It's a relationship of close relatives who, despite their squabbles and mutual teasing, ultimately share a profound, if sometimes begrudging, understanding and reliance on one another. The banter, the stereotypes, and the occasional friction are not signs of irreconcilable differences, but rather the vibrant expressions of two distinct national identities, continually negotiating their shared space. In a world increasingly interconnected, understanding such nuanced bilateral relationships offers profound insights into the intricate dance of national identity, cultural pride, and the enduring human need to define oneself, even against those who are remarkably similar.
So, the story of Germans and Austrians is one of a shared past that birthed distinct identities. Germans often see a charming, if slightly less serious neighbor, while Austrians fiercely define themselves against their larger, more direct counterpart. From language quirks to the Piefke joke, their relationship is a complex, asymmetrical sibling rivalry. It reminds us how history, even when shared, can forge unique paths, and how national identity is constantly negotiated. These nuanced perceptions, born from centuries of interaction, continue to shape their shared European future, proving that even the closest relatives can carve out profoundly unique identities. Thank you for listening.